Greetings everyone, and welcome to the very first tutorial on this channel. Today we're going to make this lovely fur ball in Maya using XGen interactive groom splines and make the fur look like it's moving around a bit, as if it's windy. Now I came up with this particular solution for my short film Teddy on the Edge, in which most of the characters, including the lead, Odyssey, the teddy bear here, are completely covered in fur using the XGen toolset. I'm not going to lie, there were a few annoyances and limitations of the system, but it was mostly robust. One of the things I wish it had was some sort of built-in wind generator to move the hairs around randomly. Of course, what you can do is create a simulation in which an N-hair system with nucleus and wind and gravity etc. drives the curves that move the XGen hair, as I did for the hair on Odyssey's head. But what I wanted rather was subtle movement in the short fur on these characters, which probably would have been too time-consuming and resource-intensive to simulate for millions of little strands. So let's jump in and I'll show you how I ended up doing this for Teddy. Okay, here we are in Maya. I'm running Power Toys, so you can see my cursor here in yellow. And when I left click it's blue, and when I right click it's red. So you can follow along with what I'm doing. If you're a complete novice to Maya, please do other tutorials, because I'm just focusing here on how to create some moving fur using XGen. So we're going to start with a poly sphere. Just going to give this radius about 7, which seems about right for a furry ball. Move it up a bit, then give it some nice subdivisions. I like 8 on the axis and 6 height, so these sides are square-ish and kind of even. Then I'm gonna just be pedantic and get rid of the triangles in the top and bottom. Okay. That's what it looks like, smoothed. Now the smooth shape is important because XGen grows from this, which is called the limit shape, I believe, not from this cage low poly shape. It'll grow from here, even if you display the object like this. So this is important, and also UV coordinates are important. So we're going to check now what these look like. By default, when you create a sphere, the UVs look like this, which are okay for some things, but not great for others. So let's just make slightly nicer UVs for our sphere. So I would suggest opening up the hypershade, docking the hypershade down here so we don't have to keep opening it. Just shifting things around so we can see what we're doing. Let's create a new shader. We can just create another Lambert shader over here. Bang. Actually, let's call this noise Lambert. Will be fine. Let's name everything. Let's name this sphere as well. This will be our fur ball. Okay. Apply this. Assign that. And let's grab just a default noise. It's just a normal 2D noise, which is why we need UVs. I would love to use volume noise on this, but XGen doesn't seem to work that way. So you can see the UVs are not great. Be viewing the ball from around here, so yeah, it's just those polar coordinates that are a bit bad. So let's do something about that. Let's just create a regular planar projection. My settings, they're hiding away. Project, okay, that's good. And then we can just find a seam, a couple of edges where we can cut our seam here, cut that. Then we'll select the shell and go modify unfold, and then this will give us an unfolded. Yeah, so there's still a seam, but it's not as egregious and as distorted, so it should be fine, especially if we're viewing the sphere from this side. So yeah, there's just our noise sphere. Now we're going to grow some XGen fur on here. So select the object, let's go to the effects menu, let's go XGen, interactive, splines. This is also one I like to dock maybe here, so we can keep the attribute editor and the XGen menu open, we can go create interactive groom splines. I've named this description fur, usually it's description 1 up here. Give it a density of 250, a length of 1, a width scale of 0.1. We can change all of these down the line, but it's good to start with a roughly decent density. And we go create. Bam. Now, the fur is so dense at the moment. It's just made out of these cards actually that face camera, but it's so dense at the moment we can't really see what's going on. So we're going to open this up. The most important ones here are fur and fur base. In fact, the sculpt one, we're not going to sculpt in this tutorial at all. There's other tutorials for that, so we're just going to delete the sculpt modifier completely. It starts with those default modifiers of scale and sculpt. So here in the fur base, we can actually modify that density. We can modify it down. See what point 1 looks like. We can actually see what these strands look like. And on the main fur options here, you can click Tube Shade, which will do a faux 3D effect on these. You can actually see the kind of volume that they would like to represent, but they are flat. Okay, so now we can go back to the base and bring our density back up to what it was, because this is a nice density. But we also want to change in these fur settings the taper of each of these. If we scale up the taper, make them start to taper at about 0.25 to give them a nice shape. And if you want to, you can adjust this width scale to kind of finesse how thick or thin you want your strands to be. It's quite nice, 0.45 I think. Yeah. Now we're going to add a modifier here, the most important one for this tutorial, which is the clump modifier. Check this out. Clump. All of these start to look like a little punk, all spiky and stuff. And within that clump modifier, we can modify a few things. So the mask and the clump just govern how much it is or isn't clumping. Sometimes it's nice just to have a middling value so they're not all hold so tightly like that. But you can also have this at 1 and then just adjust this clump scale here using this graph. You can bring this up so they never really clump completely. For some reason this is at 0.5, the base, but I don't know why. If you look closely, it makes it go out beyond where it starts if you bring that up. So generally I leave that at 0.5. If you like, you can make a middle value which kind of bulks them up a bit before they clump. And then there's other attributes like preserve length, which might have an effect later, and then also volumize, clump volumize, which gives them a bit more shape sometimes, but again, it's neither here nor there. What I like to do is take that same noise map we had and just throw that into the clump mask or the clump amount, just to create some variance here. At this point, it's actually quite useful to grab that original sphere and just duplicate it out so you can see what the noise map is doing. And you can, if you want, just create a new material for this one, which would just be a regular, in fact, let's create it here like we did before. Consistency. Create another Lambert shader. We can just call this one the fur base or something. And then grab a color that's, that same brown. Just apply that to this sphere so it doesn't look so weird. Darken that a bit. Yeah, and our fur blends in a bit more with the base color. Okay, so we've got our clumps on this thing now. It looks very unnatural with the amount it's extending out beyond the original sphere. It's just not enough variance. So sometimes it's nice in the scale just to throw on that same noise map that we had in this particular shader. So here it is. If you open scale, you can just throw this onto the scale amount. You can see we get some nice variance. If this happens after the clumping, it also helps a little bit. If you turn off clumping, you can see it without, and then it's just a matter of modifying this map which you can see in real time, left and right here, just to add some nice variance to the length of the fur. You don't want to go under 0 here, so sometimes it's good to bring up that threshold, because otherwise the sphere will be bald at those points, which we don't want. We can also go above an amplitude of 1, I believe, can we? Yeah, we can, but it doesn't actually help. So we would go up to 1 and mess around with frequency just to get a nice bit of variation here. Yeah, if we add the clumps back in, you can see it's broken it up a little bit. And there's other ways to break it up. You can up the radius variance on the on these clump shapes. Don't know how far you can go with that, but oh yeah, you can really make it vary quite a lot. I would say just something that starts to break it up a bit. Maybe like 2 or something like that. Nice. And then the final recipe, just to get a more realistic looking fur ball, is to add noise. Right at the top here. And this can just be a little bit of noise. You can actually even down the magnitude of that a bit, because obviously too much noise totally loses the clumping effect. So you just add a bit of noise, you can see that. And then the frequency is just how much it's curling along the length. And you can have the scale along the strand as well, depending on how you want that. But I think that looks quite nice. There we go. And that looks like a nice furry ball. No problems there. But what if we want this fur to move a little bit in the wind and look like it's not simulated, but just a natural little bit of movement going through? Well, we have these attributes in the clump modifier called offset and orient. So in offset, you can actually offset where these clumps are aiming. Now by default, if we turn off everything else, by default the behavior of this is very strange in that it kind of bends from a point, and that's because of the default shape of this offset scale graph. So if we delete that middle point and then put the bottom point up to 1, then it behaves properly. I don't know why this is the default behavior, but there we go. And that just offsets the end of the clump in a direction. Now the direction is currently all in one direction. It seems to be up towards the y-axis, but you can use this orient attribute to change the direction of this. So essentially, if we can animate over time this attribute and the orient as well, we can get some nice motion on here. So what I have done in the past is just to duplicate out this noise, change it to a wave. We can plug this into our test ball here just to see what's going on here. This is the wave, and the attributes I use are as follows: threshold 0, amplitude 0.8, ratio 3, frequency ratio 1, depth 3, frequency 12, and number of waves for now just 1. And then just adding some animation to this. So frame 1, set a key, frame 120, set a key, go in here, and just you can animate this from 1 to 10 to see how that looks. Yeah, not bad. Set all of these to linear just so it animates evenly over time. So we don't have to open the graph editor. And yeah, that just looks nice. Waves going around it. It does look a bit weird, but you know, you can play with these settings to get slightly different looking waves. Anyway, let's see how this looks. If we just go ahead and take that noise, select the clump, grab this, middle click, throw it into offset. Now if we play, we're going to see the clumps going up and down, but they're always going in the same direction. So what's good to do is to throw another wave into the offset. So to have some variance, we can duplicate this wave, duplicate shading network, and change the timing a bit. We can just change this up, maybe make it 16 or something, just so it changes its value a bit differently to the other one. And then in the clumping, we can throw this into orient. Now the problem here is you won't see much difference because the values it's putting into the orient. This orient operates on a 0 to 360 degrees basis, so you need to kind of multiply that out. In the past I've found if I just take a multiply divide node and just plug the output into this one and then multiply this out by like 100 or something and then plug that into the clump orient, it gives a better result. So output X to orient, close. Now on every frame I'm getting a bigger sort of variance. And they're changing direction as they go. Now this is probably a little bit extreme, and what you can do is just bring down that offset scale by quite a lot, just so it's a lot more subtle, that motion. And then when you add your scale and your noise on top of it, it just looks like some nice cheeky motion blowing through those clumps. Not bad. And that's pretty useful for fur at a distance. You just want to keep some motion going through it, or grass, or something like that. So there we have it. For this rendered version, I did mess around a bit with the curl settings under Advanced Shape and set up an Arnold hair shader plus some lighting. But that's all stuff you can find out about in existing tutorials out there. If this one gains enough interest, I'd happily do a follow-up, but that's all for now. So thanks for watching, and give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you made it all the way to the end. Cheerio!